Thank you. And obviously just let people in as they come, and we'll get started. Well, welcome everyone. My name is Michael Counts, for those of you who don't know me, and I'm the co-founder of A Plan with my beloved partner, Sarah Ellis Conant. And this webinar series is something that we started earlier, end of last year, to share our community, share our access to incredible guests. We've had so many so far. Kicked it off with Lynn Twist back in November, and we've had wonderful guests since. Sometimes outside guests, sometimes from our A-Plan coaching community. Today, I'm really excited to introduce you all to my older brother, Alex Counts. I'll give a more extensive introduction of Alex after we center, but if you're a part of this community, you know that we usually kick off meetings with a centering, and we're going to do that today. Sarah's going to lead us in that. And then my brother is going to lead us through a series of exercises and discussion. He's going to share insights from his many books. And then we'll do a couple of breakout rooms. I'm sure there'll be lots of time for interaction and Q&A. So excited that you're all here. Feel free to turn on your camera if you'd like. You don't have to, but we'd love to see everybody. And with that, I guess we'll get started. Sarah, I'll turn it over to you, and you can lead us in a couple of minutes of centering.
Wonderful. Well, I want to echo Michael's welcome to all of you who have joined us today, and a special welcome to Alex, without whom I would not know Michael. So Mike, I'm very, very grateful, and without whom A-Plan would not exist. So in a way, all of us are in this room because of Alex, and it's really special to have you here. So with that, I want to invite you to participate in one of our A-Plan coaching traditions, which is an opportunity to center and become fully present for this time. So I invite you to close your eyes down or find a soft gaze. Welcome to turn your camera off if you feel more comfortable. Have everyone mute, and take this opportunity to bring your attention to your breath. Breathing is something that we do so automatically without noticing, but just by putting our attention on the breath, we can settle into this moment. And as you begin to lengthen your inhale and your exhale, I invite you to lovingly set aside all those places where you serve and dedicate this next hour to nourishing yourself, to caring for the caregiver, nourishing the nurturer. As change makers and activists, social entrepreneurs, however you identify, I'm guessing you came here because that title resonated a little bit. A little bit of our change making can make us feel like we're losing our minds or losing ourselves. So the purpose of this time is to care for the self, learn new strategies for having this work be sustainable. And the last piece of our centering this morning, as you're just settling into this moment, I invite you to think about whose shoulders you stand on. Who has taught you and supported you and empowered you, helped make you into the caring, committed change maker that you are. just see their face before you. Call the sound of their voice. Feel what it feels like to be in their presence. And invite them to be here with you for this conversation today, whether you've seen them recently or it's been decades since they've been on this earth. Just know that they are here present, wanting you to change the world without losing your mind, without losing yourself. Let's take one unifying big inhalation together, big full deep breath. So the top of the lungs, sipping in even a little bit more air. And then a nice slow exhale through the mouth. You can even make a sound. And when you're ready, gently letting the light gently come into the eyes. And coming back to our meeting, turning your camera back on. Michael, I'll turn it back to you.
Wonderful. Thanks, Sarah. Thanks, everyone. I invite everyone to just put the name of the person that you are thinking of, if you're willing to share it, into the chat, just to honor that person, bring them into your consciousness as you already have, and then into ours. Just love to see that list pop up. So feel free. And now, before I turn it over to Alex, I want to give a little introduction, little backstory, because I think it's relevant to why we're here today. It's relevant to the work that we all do. It's relevant to A Plan and how it formed and its mission, and the power of commitment, I think, and the power of commitment to personal growth and sustainability. My brother is my older brother. He's 3.5 years older. I grew up, close enough that I was really able to see his experience when he was, I think, at the end of high school and into college. Got involved with the Hunger Project. Our family was involved, and to a certain extent, in the Est movement back in the 70s, and the Hunger Project grew out of that movement. My brother got very involved, and then that led him on a path that carries to this day. And watching him go through that journey of a commitment of service, a commitment of making a positive impact, a commitment at that time to ending world hunger, and the work that he went on to do through college, and then with results, a lobbying firm committed to ending world hunger and poverty in Washington, D.C., and then went on and got a Fulbright, went to study and work with Dr. Muhammad Yunus, the Bangladeshi economist who created the Grameen Bank and then the Grameen Foundation. My brother and Dr. Yunus co-founded the Grameen Foundation to take those ideas of microcredit to the rest of the world. Some of you may know Dr. Yunus went on in 2006 to get the Nobel Peace Prize. My brother was there with him and has been dedicated to that work for decades now. On a personal level, my brother has always been a tremendous inspiration to me. I've learned more from him and probably been impacted more by him than anybody in my life. And that's saying a lot. And I'm extremely proud of him as my brother. And I promised I would not share any of the dark side of him, the fact that he stole the bunk bed, the bottom bunk from me back in the day. Alex, I promised I wouldn't bring that up, so I'm not going to bring that up. Also, the fact that he is remorseless in his beating of me in ping pong and badminton. I'm not going to bring that up either. I'd be worried for you if everyone knew the truth about those instances. So I'm definitely not going to bring those up or talk about those at all. So, but I'll wrap up with this: that in 2002, Really actually 2001, the fall of 2001 into the beginning of 2002. I had a conversation with my brother where he was sharing an experience that he was having of working with a coach. He had started, Dave Ellis, Sarah's father, had decided to contribute coaching to a number of nonprofits in the world that were doing meaningful work that he wanted to support, in addition to his, financial contributions to such firms. And my brother, the Grameen Foundation, was one of those organizations. My brother was the recipient of coaching from Bill Rentz, who is one of our beloved coaches at A-Plan and a great coach in his own right. And what I experienced of Alex was seeing someone really be transformed. And we had grown up together. Alex's commitment was unquestionable, his dedication, his intensity. But what I observed at that time was a lightness, an ease about him that I think made him ultimately been more impactful in the work that he was doing. And I got interested and said, like, what's going on, bro? Like, what are you doing, these days that's having this impact? He told me about Bill and coaching. He told me about Dave Ellis and Dave's work. He sent me a copy of Creating Your Future. I read it. He said, hey, Dave's doing a workshop in March out in Petaluma, and Alex gave me frequent flyer miles. I was a starving artist at the time. He gave me frequent flyer miles, sent me out. Dave gave me a scholarship to go to the workshop. I met Sarah, who was early in her coaching journey and recently graduated from Stanford. I met Bill. I met Joanne. I met Peter. I met this incredible community. And when I came back, I said, I think I've met my people. And since then, my life has been about applying the things I learned from coaching, and then ultimately deciding to shift my career to extending coaching, to democratizing access to coaching, to dedicating myself to it with Sarah as my partner. We created A-Plan, and now that's just the beginning of, I think, so much more to come. But it really all roots back to my brother and his journey and his desire to grow as a person. To learn and to be ever evolving and to apply these principles. And he's gone on to write many books. One of them is Changing the World Without Losing Your Mind, as Sarah referenced in her centering. And I just couldn't be more proud. And so what we're going to do today is he's going to bring some of those insights and his experience to us as a community. And I think it really dovetails perfectly with so much of what we do as coaches and as a community. And again, I could go on, I won't. I just couldn't be more proud to have my brother here today to share with you all and to join us in this way in our community. So with that, bro, I turn it over to you.
Wow. Well, thanks to you and Sarah and the whole team and Tayo and for setting this up, for all of you for coming. What I really hope is that through listening to some of the things I've learned in my life, many of them through coaching, that you'll find at least one thing that you can apply this month that can positively impact your experience of life and your effectiveness. Even if you think 90% of things I say don't apply to you or obvious or silly, maybe one thing. So be on the lookout. I hope you find it. But I want to start with just about A-Plan. And I started to look for a coach when I went into the most kind of demanding and productive part of my career when I was about to turn 30. And this was the 90s. And it was a different environment coaching in the 90s. And by the way, remember the 90s? Remember what were we all thinking about with those clothes we were wearing and the way that our hair looked, right? I mean, honestly, but it was better than the 80s. So I guess we are evolving as a species. But anyway, but when it comes to coaching, it's you either needed two things to find a coach. You needed a ton of money to pay top dollar to this elite group of coaches, executive coaches, they were often called, or you needed to kind of know someone, right? Yeah, I know someone who knows someone who knows someone who can get you an affordable coach. But don't tell anyone. I'll just put him in touch with you. And it was kind of like that. So fortunately, when I was 29 years old, I knew someone named Sam Daly Harris, who knew someone named Dave Ellis, who knew someone named Bill Rentz, who was willing to coach me for an amount that I could afford for 5 years. And I went on to run the Grameen Foundation for almost 20 years. I raised about $300 million. We put that money into developing this microfinance movement. And as a result of the movement, I'm way oversimplifying, in many countries around the world, including many inner cities in the US, a woman who would have no place in the financial system, no financial institution willing to provide her with any kind of services, are now have 4 or 5 providers competing for her business in providing affordable financial services. Like that revolution. And yet, if I'd not had Bill working with me, I would have burned out of that role within 3 or 4 years. And then I was able to continue doing it. And I almost did anyway, even with Bill. But for all that time, I was willing to see that through for 20 years. And yes, as Michael said, sit in the Nobel ceremony in Oslo when my mentor won the Nobel Peace Prize. So, and I'm also so proud that you all have changed that. You all have made coaching, affordable coaching available. You don't need to be super rich or have some weird contact in with someone. It's available. All you need to do is go onto the A-Plan website. I'm very proud to be an ambassador for the organization. I'm really proud that my kid brother co-founded this thing, right? I mean, I still wake up some days amazed that he's old enough to drive a car. And yet he created, co-founded A-Plan. So, it's amazing things. But my career, in which, the book that, my 3 books that I'll draw from the most, called Changing the World Without Losing Your Mind. It's basically, I talk about the 3 periods of my career where I apprenticed for a decade, I ran organizations for 2 decades, and now I'm almost a decade through in this kind of more reflective coaching, teaching, writing, consulting phase. And I frame it around basically the lessons that I learned in all those things, mostly from terrible mistakes I made or minor mistakes that I made, then I had an insight. And so, and I'm going to ask you to go through a very mini version of what I went through for 5 years working on this book, which is I kept imagining over and over and over, what would I advise myself 20 years younger? And normally it would be some insight that I had maybe 5 years earlier, 10 years earlier, that I wish that I'd had earlier. It would have made me so much more happy and productive and effective. And I would go back in time, and if I had 20 minutes to talk to a younger version of myself, I would say, you should try doing it this way. And I might tell a little story about how I had the insight that worked so much better for me. And I want you to start to think about what would you advise a 20-year younger version of yourself? And if you had a very quick story to tell about that insight that might seem weird to that younger version of yourself because you hadn't had it yet. But let me say this before I ask you to, I think all of you are lifelong learners who are up to big things. Otherwise you wouldn't be here. And you also, like I did, are accumulating insights and techniques and hacks and mindsets that serve you well. And I just want to encourage you to amp up the process of recording those in writing, sharing those with others, including people you mentor. Because if any of you decide to go as far as I did, is to write a book about them, I will buy that book and I will read that book and I will review that book. And you just track me down. I'm not hard, alexcounts.com. Because I think all of us have these insights. That doesn't mean all of our insights are applicable to every other person, but a lot of them are. So, so here's what I'd like you to do: is to take a moment and again write down, if you have something to write with, what are 1 or 2 or 3 lessons, things you've taught yourself that you wished you learned earlier, that you would tell a younger version of yourself. And if there's a kind of a story around how you learned it, sometimes they just happen gradually. Note that. And I'm going to ask you in groups in a moment to share that with the people in your group. One important lesson. And if there's a story behind it, just take a minute each. But here's what I want to plant a seed. Try to avoid, if you can, kind of motherhood and apple pie. Like, be a better listener, be more patient. Like, all of us probably realize that we could apply those more, but the trick is, how do you do it? And so let me give you an example of this morning. I applied one of the things I've learned, which is that when I get anxious, one of the things that helps reduce my anxiety, which leads to me doing all sorts of things that don't serve me well, is I do 45 minutes of aerobic exercise. So this morning, when I was feeling a little anxious about this webinar, I put all my preparations aside. Earlier in my life, I would have just been over preparing over and over. And I just went for a 45-minute jog. It was a glorious day here in New York. And so the insight there is not to exercise more, not to relax. I learned a technique, which is address anxiety through physical exercise. And again, it didn't come from one particular moment. And so that is, again, a little bit more than stating the obvious, because it was a technique. And I applied it literally, I didn't plan to, but it happened that I applied it this morning. So if the technical folks could help just put us in groups of 3 or 4, so that each of us in just a moment can share. And since you weren't sent this in advance, you might be kind of making it up as you speak. What is a lesson that you learned that you wished you'd learned earlier, really impacts your life positively? And if there's like a 1 or 2 sentence version of how you learned it that might help people kind of remember it, then share that as well. And if you go around once, maybe go around a second time, and we'll get back together in about 5 minutes. Okay? All right.
Let me know if you need any help time into breakouts.
Welcome back, everyone. I want to keep going. There's a lot I want to cover here, but did anyone either speak or hear something that was really meaningful for them they'd like to share with the group and unmute themselves?
I'll go first.
Yeah, go ahead, Cindy.
That's
Yeah.
okay. I really liked John's list. The one where he said, a doctor can't heal me, pills can't heal me, like the healing comes from within. And I 100% agree with that. And I really love that point of view that John made. That was one of my favorites from our group session.
All right. Thanks, Cindy. All right. Unless there's something burning, I think we're gonna move on here. So so just to know a little bit more about me, I had 3 critical things happen early in my career, and I'm going to just, one is I wrote an outrageous letter to a future Nobel laureate telling them that he needed me on his team, and I intimated skills that I hoped that I had that I didn't have in an attempt to get him to take me on, and he accepted, and I've been partnering with him for almost 40 years, and I put that out there to maybe think about who's the person, perhaps a very famous or wealthy or influential person or intellectually gifted person that you could make an outrageous request to this week to partner with them for something that is important to you. The second thing is I observed someone I admired, a major figure in the homelessness movement and homelessness in the 80s. I met him very briefly, was overwhelmed by the experience, and then the weekend after I met him, he killed himself. And it was just baffling to me that someone who is that accomplished, changing the world in a positive way, could also be so broken. But then a decade later, I was in my dream job and I was burning myself out, following in his pathway. And that's where a third of my book, my memoir, is really about how I learned to manage myself and manage to nurture myself, even while trying to bring change to the world. So I'm going to go into some things that have been helpful to me in changing the world without doing damage to myself, and try to make it not just for those who are involved in nonprofits. And so sometimes I talk in this section when I talk about this about fundraising, but I want to think about anyone that you want to invite in to partner with you in a big way to help you accomplish something professionally, in public service, in some other way. You want to ask them to marry you, right? Anytime you're asking something for someone big, I want to ask you a question. What do you do? How do you lead up to that ask? And for me in fundraising, it was, if I'm asking for someone for at least $100,000 and often over $1 million. Like I would like, you don't just do that like out of the block. You kind of lead up to it. So I'm going to ask you again in a couple minutes to go into a group and ask you, how do you prepare for and how do you make big asks of people in where you're asking them to do something significant? One of the techniques that I used, just to give you an example, is I learned the power of asking people for advice. And I know that in some coaching circles, advice is kind of thought of a little bit negatively, and I'm not sure I mean it in that sense, but anyway, it doesn't matter. You know, there's a saying in fundraising that if you want money, ask for advice, and if you want advice, ask for money. And I don't want to unpack that but think about it a little bit. There's a lot of, anyone that's really done fundraising knows the truth of that. And by asking for advice, you know, and maybe later on, you're going to ask someone for $1 million investment in your company or $1 million contribution, or to lend their name to what you're doing, or something that's meaningful for what you're doing and meaningful for them. Something that they'd have to think about. It's a big ask. And in the lead up to that, rather than just be transactional about it and say on a certain day, can you give me $1 million? I want to get them to own the project that I'm involved in, that I'm later going to ask them for something really big. And what better way to ask their advice? It shows respect for them. It shows that you don't have all the answers, right? And you might get some really good advice. In fact, what normally happens is someone will give you 5 pieces of advice and 4 of them are completely worthless. And one of them is like, has the kind of a little bit of a brilliant idea that you never thought of. But in the meantime, the person has started to own intellectually the problem you're trying to solve or the thing you're trying to accomplish. And that will, when it comes time to ask them something big, that will matter. Also, by the way, one little thing, and I do this all the time, if someone gives you 5 pieces of advice for a project and one of them is, maybe you don't even use any of them, and 5 years later, you do something that in effect applies one of their pieces of advice, go back and find them and tell them how much, and I do that all the time. I say, you know what, that thing you advised me for 6 years ago, I just applied that an hour ago and it worked great. And just thank you so much. You know how much that strengthens relationships and affirms people. So I'm going to share with you one other major piece insight, but I want you to go back into groups, different groups, and I want you to share with people you're in a group with. When you're going to ask something for someone big, you're going to ask them to marry you. You're going to ask them to make a big investment in your company. You're going to ask them to commit 10 hours a week to volunteering with you. You're going to ask them to be, something big. How do you prepare for it? And or how do you do it? And what are the do's and don'ts of making that big ask? So let's get back in the groups of 3 and 4, and answer that question as best you can. And I'm going to share with you a very profound insight that I learned about that moment of making the big ask. Oh, did I see Lauren there? Oh, that's so awesome. Lauren is my current coach, in a long line that started with Bill Rentz and ended with her, and it may not go much further than that. We're having a great time together. So, did anyone have an insight or something you spoke or heard that just really impacted you? You'd like to share with the group? Anna, go ahead. You're muted, Anna, but. Still muted.
Here we go. Got it all.
Yes.
Okay. Clayika mentioned two points that she does before an ask, one being prayer, but also that she believes in having the presentation be brief so that you're not over talking it. It's not a hard sell. And it gives the person a chance then to ask questions. Tell me more.
I love it. Thank you, Anna. Anyone else? Quick one. All right, I don't see any hands. Oh, go, Genevieve. Yeah.
Just a quick comment that everybody
Please.
in our breakout room historically did not like to ask for help. So I think that's something that a lot of us deal with, that we have realized that it's part of the process and we're stronger in teams.
Yeah, and boy, asking for help, asking for advice, asking for partnership is just, you need to be a little bit humble, but boy, you just can get so much farther and just, I've made a career of asking people for outrageous things. And I think as long as you do it in the right spirit, where it's not out of manipulation or entitlement, it never is negative, and sometimes it's hugely positive. Sayoko, go ahead.
Thank you. One thing about ask, we all hate to ask, but what our group shared was it's an invitation for us to walk with them or help them. And it's not a slimy ask. Thank you.
Oh, that's great. Now, let me then say a couple more things here. This is wonderful. So when you're asking someone, something else I was gonna say, but let me share with you probably the most important insight I've had is, and I'm going to start with the insight, and I'm going to tell you a little story behind it. It might make it a little more sticky, which is that if you're going to ask something for someone big, I say you should never, ever do it apologetically or hesitantly. If you're about to ask someone something big and you're doing it from a sense of apology or hesitation, uncomfortableness, just you need to go back and do some work on yourself. Or maybe you shouldn't make the ask. And let me tell you the story of how I learned that. So back when I was starting Grameen Foundation, Mohammed Yunus, the future Nobel laureate, asked me during a trip to the US, he said, Alex, I need you to raise $10.6 million to support a project I'm starting in Bangladesh. And I had no idea how to raise even $1 million. My organization was almost bankrupt by that point. But you all know, when your big boss asks you to do something, what do you say? You say, yes, sir, I'm on it. And so somehow or other, I ended up 5 weeks later sitting in front of the newly appointed head of George Soros's new foundation, which today we know as the Open Society Foundation. And I was pitching him this project. I didn't even really understand it as well as I should have, but I was doing what I got the appointment, and a point came into me. This is important. Point came in it when he asked me, well, how much money do you need? How much money does Professor Yunus need? And I was so terribly uncomfortable with the fact that I was asking someone for more than $10 million that every bone in my body wanted to kind of give an evasive answer, to say, well, I'm not sure if this is really appropriate. I mean, I was worried that if I told him how much I wanted, he would call building security and have me let out of the building. Like, that was my level of discomfort with it. But somehow despite my discomfort, my wanting to give him this evasive answer where I was kind of undercutting my ask, or as we say in fundraising, stepping on my ask, I just looked him in the eye and I said $10.6 million, which was the answer. And he just noted it down on his yellow pad, looked totally unimpressed with everything I was saying, and then asked me a few more questions. And the end of the story is that within a year, we got the $10.6 million. Within a year, this man's wife was sitting on as the vice chair of my board of directors, and they began contributing $5,000 a year, which they did for more than a decade, to Grameen Foundation personally, which George Soros triple matched, so $20,000 a year. And here's what I'm saying. If I had answered his question about that we needed $10.6 million hesitantly or apologetically, kind of undercut there's no way that we get the money. There's no way his wife sits on our board. There's no way they make that. The fact that I was willing to own, and the way I came at it, thinking about it later, was I was saying, this project is so good, it will not only serve Mohammed Yunus and the people of Bangladesh, it'll serve George Soros and you. This is a win-win-win. So why should I be apologizing or hesitant? It's like, the bigger it is, the bigger the impact. And that's how it worked out. And so again, whenever I've been in a position asking for anything big from anyone, I come at it saying, I'm only asking because it's going to serve me and things I care about, and you and things you care about. Or now maybe the person doesn't yet have the insight about how that will help them and the things they care about, but if they're open to it, we might be able to create that. So never ask for anything big, hesitantly or apologetically. Come from a spirit of partnership and opportunity. Okay. I learned a few things about managing people. I was not really good at it to begin with. So I'm kind of shifting gears here. And I learned three things well, I've learned many things, again, mostly through mistakes. One of which sounds really weird, is I learned that it's as important it is, first of all, it's important to reward success, right? If someone working with you or for you does something well, you all reward them, right? Right? I mean, in fact, if you want to throw in the chat, like what ways that you appreciate and reward people who succeed, who are teammates of yours or people that report to you. And just to think about, this is the way we do it. Show respect, show appreciation for results. Here's the insight that I had that's a little bit less intuitive, which is I found how important it is to, at times, even more important than to reward success is to reward failure. Huh? What did he say? What? I thought this guy was smart, wrote books. What is he saying? Well, no. The truth is, and I made a ton of mistakes when I was running Grameen Foundation for the first time. I had a board chair who was demanding, but also very indulgent of me. And all that she asked when I made a big mistake is that I, first of all, let in the emotional kind of hurt of that, especially if it was a big public mistake. But second of all, that I learned the lesson of where in my thought process, what hypothesis or assumption did I make that was wrong. And as long as I showed that I learned the lesson from that mistake, she said, you're now a better professional. And by the way, when you learn a lesson from something you messed up big time, do you ever forget those lessons?
No.
No. They are ingrained in your consciousness in a way that the lesson you learned from a success, you might not even learn the right lesson, but it doesn't stick as much. So if she said, if I learned the lesson, she would give me a raise. She would almost act as if I'd succeeded. And that's how I managed people for the longest time. And it sounds weird, but it works. The second thing I learned about managing people is one of my mentors, a couple of my mentors actually, mentors don't always teach you the right things. You need to exercise judgment. And one of the things I learned from my mentors that I needed to unlearn was that if you appreciate people you're working with, they're going to become complacent. So be very stingy with and what I learned later is that's completely wrong, or at least it's wrong for me. That's all I can say for sure. So what I started to do in my mind is I would just say, whatever impact, like if I'm going to appreciate Sarah for something she did with me or for me, I had this little mental trick. I said, however much I think that's going to mean to Sarah, I'm going to assume it's going to mean 5 times more than I think. And then I'm going to think, okay, then how likely it is will I do this, and how thoughtful will I be about it? And again, because I think normally 5x wrong in terms of the impact, and I've just become like an appreciation machine, and probably could still do it more. And again, it hasn't made people complacent. It's made people feel whole, feel known by me. And sometimes it's an appreciation of how they failed and learned. To go back to my other thing. Let me shift in the last couple of minutes this idea of, okay, how do you do all this? How do you live in this intense environment of trying to create great companies or great nonprofits or great families or great churches, congregations? And it can become very intense, and it can become so intense that it starts to wear on you. And yes, I believe all of us, we can work intensively and pump that adrenaline for a few days or a few weeks at a time, but we need to care for ourselves. Otherwise, again, as I said, I was at age 33, I'd almost burned out of my dream job. And so I'll give you 2 examples, one of which I mentioned earlier, and then we'll just start to wind down in this wonderful session. So I learned, first of all, here's the kind of the generalized lesson, which is I would urge all of you to think about and try to identify what I would call your fatal flaw as a professional or as a human being. Now, I do believe in working on strengths. I do believe in being a strengths-based management but I think it's also important what trips you up. And I'll tell you what mine is, or at least one of mine. And by the way, if you don't know what yours is or you're not sure, go out and have a glass of wine if you're into that kind of thing with a couple of your friends. They'll tell you if you really convince them you want to know. I mean, really. But mine was, I learned it after a while, is that when I got anxious, like I was getting a little anxious this morning about this webinar, I just start making bad decisions and start treating people badly. And I said, well, what can I do about this? I just started testing things. And the thing that I saw that worked is to take time out almost every day, 6 days a week, which I've been doing for more than 15 years, and exercise aerobically for at least 45 minutes. It doesn't eliminate my anxiety, but I think it cuts it by about 2/3. And that's unscientific, but that's just how it feels. And then I start making better decisions. I start being a better husband and supervisor and teammate. And so am I recommending that you exercise more? Probably. But what I'm more is, if you can identify your fatal flaw and then just spend a year testing ideas to bring it under control, and then use all the discipline and all the support you can get from others to apply that success strategy as much as you can until you find a better one. Sounds kind of obvious, but it's transformed my life. The second thing, it's a little more quirky, I suppose, is I found I had the insight after I just fell into this, is that I've come to believe that it's super important for all of us, or at least for me, to be doing something at every point in your life that you're a novice or beginner at, but to do it seriously, like but you're bad at it, but you want to get good at it. And there's actually a book with some data to back this up. And there's a book that I read. Now, it's not as good as my books, but still a really good book. And it's called, it might be as good. It's called, by a guy named Tom Vanderbilt, who's like a journalist by trade. He wrote Beginners, the joy and transformative power of lifelong learning. And what it kind of validated in my mind is the story of how I learned this insight is I walked into a bar in Key West, Florida, and I heard a band playing music. And if I understood what genre they were playing, I said I would have hated that genre. It was kind of a variation of bluegrass, which I now love. And I fell in love with their music. I was mesmerized. And I just said to them, I said, let me talk to your manager. Let me talk to your fan club president. Like, I want to get involved. And like, we don't have any of those. Like, we're poor musicians from, and I said, well, I'll do all of that for free. Like, I'll be your manager. And I did it really badly for about a year, but with great enthusiasm and a desire to learn. I kept putting myself around people that knew a ton about music and the music business and all these things of which I knew nothing. And yet what it did for me, and what it might do for you, is being a novice at something you care about. To me, it made me more playful. It made me more curious. It made me less complacent. It made me less of a know-it-all. Not just in that area, but throughout my life, right? It got that, someone I told this story to once said, oh yeah, this is from Buddhism, which I don't know much about. It's like the beginner's mind is the learner's mind. And if you get that learner's mind going in one dimension of your life, I find that it kind of goes across all of them. And so I've always, here's the little pitfall with this, is that you actually ultimately get good at those things if you keep at it long enough. So I actually got good at being like a volunteer manager for a bluegrass band. And that's a whole other story for another webinar. And so I replaced it with another thing. I started cooking, and I went from being a terrible cook to being a solid intermediate cook. And right now my thing is learning a third language, Spanish. So that for me is that power of being a lifelong learner, because I find that most of us gravitate towards things that we're comfortable at or we're good at. And there's nothing wrong with that, but mixing in something you're not good at, but you want to be good at, I find it very powerful. So let me end there. I want to just leave you with a couple of things. And if there are some final business A-Plan wants to do, or any final questions, I'll leave you with a URL for my books. I've written 3, and you're welcome to take a look at those. And also, I'm going on a book tour with 2 other amazing authors later this month in Chicago, New York, Newark, Princeton, and DC. And if you're in any of those cities later this month and want to come see me and 2 other amazing authors and nonprofit leaders, I'd love to see you. And if you're not in those, one of them is virtual, but all the rest are just strictly in person. But it's been my pleasure to be talking to you, sharing a few of the insights that I've had, and I'll turn it back to Michael to, as always happening, like around the dinner table that I'm sitting at right now. He gets the final word. So let's go back to that.
Well, wonderful, bro. That was really, really fantastic, and thank you so much for sharing with our community. And it's you know, I've always found you to be so inspiring, but when you share like this, it goes to a whole nother level. I want to give our last word actually to Sarah, my partner and our CEO. Is anything, Sarah, you want to say in acknowledgement of Alex or in wrap up of anything? I'll hand it to you for a moment.
Yeah, just thank you, Alex, for being the seed that founded A Plan, and for being, I benefited so much realizing how I want to ask a lot more than I do, and for more outrageous things, and in service of A Plan and our mission to provide coaching for change makers. And you know, we had leaders on the line here from, I see multiple different foundations, from the Obama Foundation to the Draper Richards Kaplan Foundation to nonprofits around the world. So it's just a thrill to know that your fairy dust, your wisdom, your guidance is reaching out in this way. So thank you all for joining. Thank you, Alex, for being the amazing man that you are. And we'll see you all in May for our next webinar. Keep your eyes out. And we'll also send a recording for today if you want to share it with anyone else in your community. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you, Alex. Wonderful to see you all.
Take care, everybody.